Heidegger tries to draw a difference between two forms of generality. The in itself featureless abiding being drawn together by an active referential trait of occurrence and occasioning, a pull of all animals, is different, something else than a species name or rather a generic concept. A notion that cannot be reduced to criteria then must also in quotation marks function differently than by application and criteria comparison. Verallgemeinerung, generalization, usually calls for generalization of certain features, produced via a certain criterion. This is a form of generality that is logically valid for all and therefore categorically binding. For example, a law that can be applied by cases. The essence as essential abiding and bringing together and letting in is now not logically valid in the sense that I can apply it as a concept and sentence specific cases under it. Explanation of the connection of essences via, in parentheses, think, explain, make references, pursue meaning, versus speaking out of the gathering trait, the abiding realm. Former is an abstract philosophical question of truth, about what is essential in the world. But is that really addressing what the worlding world, keeping and holding onto itself, lets arrive? Heidegger explains that this question of essential abiding is not unambiguous. Heidegger is not concerned with, once again, establishing the essence of the animal, for example, but rather to be philosophically active and thereby to let appear from itself how the philosophical movement as such leads back to the reason, the grounding as such, which is, again, ambiguous, ambivalent. First, there is a question of the essence. The question of essence presents itself as necessary. Second, there is a claim of an explanation connected with it. Third, but not connected with it is the claim of an unambiguous contradiction frictionless truth. The primary truth claims which makes decision, Heidegger remarks, but it, the truth, remains in motion. We are dealing with something, rather a no thing that is ambiguous. The stone is in the world exactly the way that it has no access to being, no world, says Heidegger. Accesslessness of the stone, however, is not to be taken as a lack, but its specific way of being. In quotation marks, because if we want to understand, take that as a lack, we always already understand that as a hierarchical organization. And who gives that? What is the respective criterion that can be used for that, and is it resilient? Does it hold to truthful, true to being? Then it would be a lack of being itself. That's just what the stone and the animal show as their specific being and that they, in quotation marks, are. Referencelessness is therefore conversely a specific quality of the stone. The animal as world poor. It depends now on how we understand this less of access, reference, relation. The specific poverty of this reference of the animal is the specific way of its being in the world. Preferably addresses what poverty actually is, being poor as lacking, in quotation marks, way of being adequate, not mere quality, not mere indifference to the possession, for example. Poverty rather understood in such a way that something lacks would mean disparagement, which thereby arises out of uncomeliness withdrawal. Being conscious, in quotation marks, I have the consciousness of what I have. But the question aims at a specific being, the way of being. Poverty not only the result or kind of lack, in parentheses, no external perspective taken. The question goes to how the animal limits and directs itself to a world, almost plunges itself in its specific circumferences. Limitation of worldly goods just opens the place of an intensity of access to the world. A arisal of the world is a specific intensity, area or realm in which the animal relates to the world. To seek out anxiety as nothingness, a drawing spent relatedness to the moment as moment of specific temporality, which goes around whereas on the other hand, the fullness and surrounding has its own language, its own context. In quotation marks, the most difficult thing is the comportment into it. For how can we actually think nature? How can we comport to the animal, to the stone, if there is no production of objectivity, of things that confront us, that need to be investigated and whose potential are to be uncovered, means? A completely paradoxical and alien thing, the animal, the stone, which is not conceivable at all, can be understood conclusively from the human perspective par excellence, world poor, worldless, in quotation marks, being in the world, to highlight a certain problem in it and keep the track open, the path and the way open, to bring together completely different understandings of the world. Is it possible to bring this together on a saying of the world, on an outspoken or an outspeaking of the world which can reach through there?